Greetings to everyone joining us here in Seattle and virtually from across the globe. While we remain physically separated by this terrible global pandemic, we're delighted to be together with all of you as we celebrate the Holocaust Center for Humanity's 17th Annual Voices for Humanity Luncheon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Bob Evans, and I'm so proud to be a board member of the Holocaust Center. I'm here today with my husband, Steve Davis, as co-chairs of today's event. We are honored to be part of this celebration for an institution we are proud to passionately support. People are often surprised by my involvement with the center. I'm not Jewish, and I'm not related to any survivors. I didn't grow up knowing these stories. In fact, I don't recall learning much about the Holocaust at all as a young person. So, what's the connection? Well, Steve and I have spent 4 decades together as a couple committed to social justice everywhere. Whether in my work as a teacher in Harlem and in Seattle, or as a community activist working for LGBTQ inclusion, the lessons from the Holocaust provide profound insights for battling hate and injustice every day. As an elementary teacher, I had to do a lot of digging to find appropriate stories for the Holocaust and other genocides for my students. It was hard to find the right tools to help me explain both what happened in Europe as well as the Japanese internment right here in our own backyard. That changed when I was introduced to the Holocaust Center and its amazing resources. I am so grateful for the center's impact that I've jumped in fully to advance this work in every possible way.
I, too, am very excited and honored to be here today supporting the Holocaust Center. Through Bob's work, I've been able to appreciate the center's impact on students and programs across our region. I'm now at the Gates Foundation and I teach at Stanford, and my own career in both human rights and global health and development has brought me to the front lines of some of the most challenging catastrophes we've faced in the world. The killing fields of Cambodia, programs supporting Salvadorans after their bloody civil war, managing a fight against Ebola in Africa, and more recently, fighting against injustice against juvenile incarceration of our Black and brown neighbors here at home. Nothing could have shown me more clearly how much we need more education about how hate can and has been systemically manufactured, manipulated, and misused with dire consequences. Growing up in rural Montana, I did know about the Holocaust because one of my favorite aunts was an Army nurse working in Germany in May 1945 as the camps were liberated. Now, she didn't speak often about those experiences, but she did share a letter that she wrote to my grandparents from Woblin, a small camp about 100 kilometers east of Hamburg, describing the horror, the confusion, and the outrage, and her commitment to never let this happen again. About 20 years ago, I took this letter back to the museum at Woblin. It helped them fill in gaps in their own records and identify some survivors and some numbered dead. Now, I've shared that letter and story with many people, and I wish that my Aunt Annie was still with us. I would ask her more about what she saw, what she did, and the lessons she thinks we should all learn. But I think I know the answer. Be part of history, do what is right, and don't forget. So, in honor of her spirit, and in honor of all of you who are working so hard to make this center successful, let's get to the business at hand today.
We are here today to celebrate the center and to raise $950,000 for its mission. Throughout the event, we'll keep you updated on our progress and how much more we need to raise. But first, we want to thank our sponsors and supporters who have already committed meaningful donations. Thank you to our lead corporate sponsors, Goldman Sachs, Alpha Graphics, American Classic Homes, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Perkins Coie, Brighton Jones, and Dick's. And now, I'm thrilled to announce that the Holocaust Center has already raised, I'm looking at the screen, $713,340,000. Wow. Your generosity is astonishing. We've just begun our program, but I want you to know it's not too early to donate. This year, donating is even easier. Click the donating screen on the button on the video on this page, or text 2021 VFH to 41444 on your smartphone. Finally, our staff is ready to take your donation by phone. Please call 206-582-3000 to give. If you've registered early for today's program, you should have received a small notepad in the mail. On the top of the notepad, it asks, what's one way change can begin with me today? As we begin, take a moment and share your answer in our live chat. Let's make today not just about what we have done, but what we will do as a community moving forward to galvanize change. As you're thinking of your answer, perhaps our first segment on our center's mission can provide you with some inspiration.
I think it's important for students our age to learn about the Holocaust because we are our future.
There's still real problems in our world that we need to fix, and to resonate that with the Holocaust is very important so we can learn lessons from the Holocaust.
While we're studying the Holocaust in depth, we learn these are actual people, these are their stories, and it's not something we ever want to happen again.
We're the future of this country, so when we grow up and start our adult lives, we don't want to make the same mistakes that have been made in the past.
It's important for us to teach about the Holocaust in these times because our culture is at an inflection point. Anti-racism is becoming a much more important focus. If we're going to confront racism, we have to learn about the Holocaust and learn about the history of anti-Semitism.
In terms of teaching the Holocaust this year, in comparison to years past, there's more need. We don't have as much time with students. We don't have that personal connection like we normally do. So we have to try harder with the resources that we have to try to communicate.
The demand for what are now virtual Speakers Bureau has been through the roof, really. There's so many presentations, and we have so many of our survivors and legacy speakers who are ready, willing, and able to come and speak virtually.
I'm going to be sharing with you how my parents, Imre Friedman and Naomi Kraus, survived the Holocaust.
It's very exciting to be talking to people around the world.
So the virtual tour that we attended, the way that it was set up was so thought-provoking, so relatable for the students.
My name is Carl. I'm a docent at the Holocaust Center for Humanity. While I would much prefer to see you in person, I guess the upside of this COVID thing is that being in Wenatchee, it would be tough for you to get to Seattle. So I'm grateful to be able to do this with you today.
In the virtual field trip, there were a lot of connections to Washington and Seattle. It was easier to figure out how those people might have been feeling because of the way we were introduced to this topic.
I'd say the value of Holocaust education for students is learning real difficult history and learning what the outcomes were, learning why it started, trying to wrap your hands around how to avoid it. My kids were able to approach the events of last spring because they had that context. We had done the pre-teaching. We looked at a lot of the information from the Holocaust Center.
One of the neat things as a curriculum coordinator for the district is I'm able to partner with organizations like the Holocaust Center for Humanity to bring in professional learning. And in doing so, we are able to collectively impact our 34 schools, and we impact potentially thousands of students in one fell swoop.
I think it's really important to prioritize the resources that we give our teachers around teaching the Holocaust, because this is maybe the most intense unit they encounter, and one of the ones that they can see how it impacts their life in the present and in the future. The resources from the Holocaust Center for Humanity has allowed us to prioritize by setting the rationale for it, really creating the conditions to let students know this is a safe place for them, a place for students to be able to look at hate and prejudice and be able to examine it, and then be able to learn about people who actually experienced the Holocaust. And that's one of the most unique things, is being able to actually connect and hear stories of survivors who settled in Washington State.
One of the ways we know that our relationship with the Holocaust Center for Humanity is working, this was rolled out during COVID. They're in this online Zoom world, but they're still motivated to come in and learn this. And that to me is a sign of success.
Washington state law requires that educators who teach about the Holocaust must adhere to best practices and guidelines. We at the Holocaust Center for Humanity develop these best practices. The heart of these resources is to help educators successfully teach lessons beyond the history.
Giving teachers a framework on how to approach this difficult subject. This has been incredibly valuable knowledge from the center to encourage not just how to teach the Holocaust, but it's important that we teach the humanity part of that. It's one of the things when we talk about the Holocaust Center for Humanity, it really is teaching shared values of humanity, of humanizing each other.
Students learn the dangers of where hatred can and does lead when ordinary people turn a blind eye to biased attitudes and actions. By evaluating primary sources, students consider examples from the Holocaust, recent history, and ultimately connect these sobering realizations with their own lives.
It didn't happen overnight. Racism crept into Germany slowly, and I don't want to see something like that happen here.
The stories of the survivors can inspire us to be better people.
If we ignore history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Teens and kids in general are very powerful, and we might not realize it, but we do hold a lot of power. And I think that a lot of kids are not motivated until we start learning about things like the Holocaust. If we don't learn about the consequence of being a bystander versus being an upstander, then maybe we're just not going to be upstanders, and that's not a great world to live in.
We hear a lot about bystanders and people who saw what happened, but the stories that really always stick out to us are the people who didn't let it happen, are the people who tried to stop it from happening, and those are the stories that make a difference.
Holocaust education is important today because in 2021, we find ourselves in the midst of continued genocides around the globe, and our world continues to be overrun with anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of hatred that produced and sustained the Holocaust and other genocidal regimes.
It's so very, very important that we learn to understand each other and respect each other as human beings, no matter if we practice religions in a different way or we have different colored skin.
Our slogan at the center is, "Change begins with me." And I hope that after learning about the Holocaust, students are motivated to confront bigotry in all its forms, to stand up, and to make their voices heard.
Holocaust education is important because it teaches that we have a collective responsibility to be more involved and inclusive in our communities. And it is also empowering because it teaches us that each of us individually can be courageous, inspiring, and determined to lift up others.
Have been supporting the Holocaust Center for quite some time. It is amazing for us to see how far this organization has come. Hearing from students reminds us just how important the continued expansion of the Holocaust Center's work is. Now, it's our honor to introduce you to our first Voices of Humanity honoree today. Tom Ikeda is the first founding executive director of Densho, a nonprofit organization started in 1996. Densho's mission is to preserve and share the history of World War II Japanese American incarceration to promote justice and equity today. Tom is a third-generation Japanese American who was born and raised in Seattle. Tom has conducted over 250 video-recorded oral history interviews with Japanese Americans. Prior to working with Densho, Tom was a general manager at Microsoft and multimedia publishing in the Multimedia Publishing Group. Tom has received numerous awards for his community and historical contributions, including the Humanities Washington Award for Outstanding Achievement in Public Humanities, the National JACL Japanese American of the Biennium Award, the Microsoft Alumni Integral Fellows Award, the Japanese American National Museum Founders Award, and the Robert Gray Medal from the Washington State Historical Society. Thanks to Tom, the Holocaust Center and Densho have had a lasting partnership over the last decade, using the power of testimonies to create a better future. Thank you, Tom, for your partnership. I'm pleased to welcome Tom live from the Holocaust Center to accept his award and to say a few words. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob and Steve, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for sharing your personal stories. Thank you, Holocaust Center for Humanity, for this award. This award is meaningful because I have learned so much by observing the center for over 25 years. In 1996, when Densho was founded, members of the Japanese American community wanted to preserve the stories of our elders who were unjustly incarcerated during World War II. We looked around to see what other communities and organizations were doing. At that time, I talked with the center and found out that they were partnering with a TV station to videotape oral histories of Holocaust survivors. Using video cameras to record oral histories was innovative in 1996 because almost everyone else was just doing the older audio recording of oral histories. Seeing the center using video, and also the Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles using video, helped convince us that we also needed to video record these precious stories. This early help to show us the power of authentic personal testimony also helped us see the importance of preserving photographs, letters, and diaries to go along with the stories. Today, Densho has over 100,000 interviews, historic photographs, documents, and newspaper articles available online for free for anyone to examine and learn about the Japanese American World War II experience. But preserving these precious materials is not enough. And again, we have learned from the Holocaust Center. We have learned the importance of connecting stories through education. I have been so fortunate to participate in some of the center's teacher training workshops. The center would bring teachers from all parts of the country to come to Seattle to not only learn about the Holocaust, but also other events caused by hatred, like the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans. It is this concept of working together and connecting our stories that makes me so grateful for the strong connection between Densho and the center. 25 years ago, when Densho was founded, some of us would use the words, "never again." We knew these were words used in the Jewish community when talking about the Holocaust. Japanese Americans said these words when talking about the incarceration of 126,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. However, today, the reality is, never again is now. Fear and hatred grip our country today. Unfortunately, Jews, Asian Americans, Muslims, immigrants are being scapegoated and targeted for violence. The Holocaust Center, Densho, and other like-minded organizations recognize we all have to be unified against ignorance and hate. We are all similarly motivated by a spirit of humanity, and the more we collaborate, the more we know each other's stories, the greater the impact for students, teachers, and all Americans. The Holocaust Center is a gift to our community and deserves support from all of us. Thank you, Holocaust Center for Humanity, not only for this award, but for your work, friendship, and partnership. Now, please join me as we hear from individuals who participate in some of the center's ongoing community programs.
Hi, my name's Carl. I'm a volunteer. I'm a docent at the Holocaust Center. I've been doing that since 2015. And it was very rare for me to miss a lunch and learn in the pre-pandemic days. So when the lockdown came, there was just a very terrible void. I was just so thrilled when not only did the virtual lunch and learn become something to look forward to, but it was happening weekly, and it took the loneliness of the pandemic and turned it into a time of learning. One of my favorites was Professor Douglas, who talked about the Nuremberg trials. It was so compelling that I read 3 of his books afterwards. So this is an innovation that I consider to be brilliant and that I hope will continue to be a part of the center's programming when the pandemic is behind us.
Hi, I'm Jessica Fenton, and I'm a legacy speaker for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Speakers Bureau. I'm also a proud member of the Continuing Generations Group. The Continuing Generations Group is comprised of children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Both of my grandparents survived the Holocaust, and growing up around them provided me with unique opportunities to hear their stories and experience things that not many other people can experience. The Continuing Generations Group allows me to connect with other children and grandchildren of survivors so that we can support each other, share our stories, and help each other deal with some triggering events that may happen in our current times. I'm very grateful to the Holocaust Center for providing us a place for us to gather and to support each other and to continue to grow and learn as children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors.
My name is Max Gunn. I'm an ambassador for change here at the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle. Ambassadors for Change is a year-long cohort for young adults organized to raise awareness for the Holocaust Center, inspire change in our community, and help you build your personal and professional networks through mission-based social and educational opportunities. I joined this program 2 years ago, in large part because my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor, and I feel it is my duty to continue that legacy and make sure that people are aware of the atrocities of the Holocaust. One of the most inspiring parts of this cohort has been being part of a diverse group, both Jewish and non-Jewish. In line with the Holocaust Center's mission, not only do we focus on raising awareness and education on the Holocaust, but also other racial and ethnic genocides throughout history. Even in just the 2 years since this group began, we have seen anti-Semitism and other racial injustices on the rise, making the work we do even more important to educate. Thank you so much for your support to help us expand our reach.
Learning about the Holocaust is important so that we can prevent tragedies like it from happening in the future. We need to learn from our mistakes and learn from our survivors' stories so that we can make sure this event never repeats itself.
I have a responsibility to speak up about injustice in all its forms. It can teach us not only how to prevent genocides and tragedies like the Holocaust from happening in the future, but also how to create social change and address the root causes of the Holocaust.
Learning about the Holocaust has taught me that it's important to share the stories and voices of those who no longer can.
Learning about the Holocaust has taught me the importance of taking action in the face of hate and prejudice.
Learning about the Holocaust is important because history very often repeats itself, so paying attention when learning about the tragedies that have been so destructive in the past keeps more from happening in the future to any targeted group.
Learning about the Holocaust has taught me how biased ideas can quickly become genocides. It has taught me why we need to stand up for others and how to do so.
If I could make the world a better place, I would encourage empathy and open-mindedness. Listening to others' perspectives and being open to learning is so important because it helps to spark compassion instead of judgment or hate among different groups of people.
I would stop this endless cycle of misinformation online and in the news.
If I could make the world a better place, I would want there to be no more hatred and discrimination. I would make sure that everyone felt like they belonged and were just as important as everyone else.
If I could make the world a better place, I would give everyone a Holocaust education.
If I could make the world a better place, I would want to make sure that we were all able to recognize the humanity in others and treat each other with kindness and respect.
It has been a pleasure this year to be a part of the Educators for Change from the Holocaust Center for Humanity. The resources and the materials that they have provided both myself and my students have been amazing. For my grade level of 7th grade, I've noticed that graphic novels can be a wonderful tool. I'm really excited about this new graphic novel, mainly because it's a true survivor story. I see the value of graphic novels as a way for students to connect. The drawings, the insightfulness as far as emotions that are portrayed in a graphic novel really come through, and I know my students really enjoyed that.
When we heard about this project, my wife and I were really interested in it to bring this book to the market.
overall, my thoughts are that this is a fantastic project, again, for the Holocaust Center, very innovative to come up with something new and bring in new people. This is just a way of to show that the Holocaust Center is involved in coming up with new ideas to spread the message of what you stand for. So I think it shows that you can be very relevant with new ways of going after the younger people.
As a high school teacher, I think this project is incredibly important for many reasons. In my classroom, it's incredibly valuable to have stories of local survivors like Steve Adler because it connects my students to the Holocaust. By focusing on the stories of survivors that are local and have been a part of our community, it connects my students in a real way to the lessons of the Holocaust and how it has impacted people around them. Using imagery that it challenges the students to consider different angles and draws them in. Art in general brings about empathy. And so you mixing the art with the powerful storytelling, and it engages the students at a higher level.
To be able to look and to draw out that empathy from students and to have great discussions about what is being portrayed and what happened during that time period, it has been amazing. So thank you very much.
I hope you all have a chance to read the graphic novel. I'm Dee Simon, the Baral family CEO of the Holocaust Center for Humanity. Okay, I'm dying to know how much we've raised so far. Can we see the number? Yes, 769,000, yes. All right, I know we can make it. I want to acknowledge and thank a few of our organization's lead sponsors, Carl and Joan Bianco, George and Elbaum and Mimi Jensen, Stephen Baral, Debbie Killinger, Judy and Joe Schocken, and the Powell Family Foundation, Nancy Powell and Carol Heller. I'd also like to thank our dedicated staff, Alana Cohen-Kennedy, Richard Green, Paul Rugelberg, Lori Warshaw-Cohen, Amanda Davis, Julia Thompson, Devonshire Lockie, Morgan Romero, and Katie Lawrence. One of the reasons studying the Holocaust is so compelling for students and adults is that it's a history lesson that speaks to our times. It raises questions like, how did a country go from protecting its people to killing them? We know that the perpetrators lived in a modern society, a democracy. They voted their leaders into power. They had a constitution. And nothing they did in Germany was outside of the law. They simply changed the laws. How do we teach this complex history and apply the lessons to today? Well, sometimes real learning begins with a story. I'd like to share how what might seem like a very small story in our museum becomes an invaluable teaching tool. It's the story of Klaus Stern and his best friend, Walter. As a young boy, every day after school, Klaus helped his friend Walter clean his parents' restaurant so that they could go out and play. The two boys were inseparable. At 13, Walter joined the Hitler Youth, and years later, Klaus was deported to Auschwitz. Klaus survived 28 months as a slave laborer in Monowitz, a subcamp of Auschwitz. The fact that Klaus survived after unthinkable abuse and starvation is a miracle. Long after the war, in a speaking engagement, a student asked Klaus about his most painful memory. His response was that it was when his best friend Walter would no longer play with him, because Klaus was Jewish. Imagine, after 28 months in Auschwitz, the pain of a best friend's betrayal was harder to bear than the cruelty of strangers. In order to understand this simple story, students learn about the rise of the Nazi Party, the propaganda and lies that turned people against their neighbors, anti-Semitism, the real threat to Klaus and his family, and the eventual deportation and killing of 6 million Jewish people. A simple story, a friend's betrayal, a history lesson, all with profound implications for our times. Today, racism towards Asian Americans came out during the pandemic, but it wasn't new. It resurfaces when people need a scapegoat. Anti-Semitism didn't start with the Holocaust. It just reemerged when given fuel. Germany could have never killed 6 million people without the willing support of individuals in every country they occupied. A lesson for today in the story of Holocaust survivor Klaus Stern and his friend Walter Maybe as simple as this: Walter had a choice. The power to fight hate is within each of us. If hate can be taught, we can teach respect. In countries throughout the world, children are being taught to hate Jews in America and parts of the Middle East, Muslims in parts of China and India, LGBTQ in parts of Africa. Our students are exposed to online platforms that promote hate sites, anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Israel, and racism, all within the convenience of their cell phones. If we want to give our students the tools they need to fight back, we need to show up. If hate can be taught, we can teach respect. By joining us here today, you're showing up. I'd like to share some of the ways the center is delivering this education. Our Speakers Bureau has over 30 members. Teaching Trunks, book sets, and scholarships delivers books into the hands of students in their classrooms and at home. Field trips are both virtual and in-person. The Writing, Art, and Film contest allows students to express what they've learned through language, art, and film. Online resources provide curriculum and activities. Professional development trains educators to teach this complex subject. All of these resources are free, making the lessons accessible to every student in our state, regardless of their income or their zip code. In addition, our community programs include CLE sessions for attorneys, an extensive police training program, and weekly lunch and learns. And to ensure all of these programs impact even more people, this year, the center completed a 3-year strategic plan led by board member Paul Bloom. We can't wait to share the plan with the community. In 1989, Holocaust survivors who founded our organization began speaking in schools because they heard about Holocaust denial. But a more significant threat today is Holocaust distortion. Several weeks ago, I gave a tour of our museum to State Representative Jim Walsh. If you recall, he was the legislator who wore a yellow star to show solidarity between people who were forced to wear masks and Jewish people who were forced to wear a yellow star. Regardless of how you sway politically, this is a clear distortion of the fact that Jews were identified by the yellow star in order to eventually murder them, while people today are required to wear masks in the hopes of saving lives. Misinformation distorts history, insults the memory of those who were killed, and feeds into anti-Semitism and false narratives. The center's work is critical today on so many levels, whether it's preserving historical accuracy, combating the proliferation of online hate, or teaching respect. Studies have shown that our greatest weapon against racism and hate is education. Our job is to show up and teach so that friends like Klaus and Walter will never be torn apart. Thank you for joining us in this critical work. Before I go, I'd like to introduce our next film. You'll hear students talking about online aggression on social media. Thank you.
I've seen a lot of discrimination on social media and the news, and I don't think that really should be happening. People that are behind screens, they'll feel more comfortable to say it online instead of in your face.
Social media gives a bigger audience and a bigger platform for people to spread harmful posts or harmful memes or harmful jokes about different groups of people.
It's crucial for students to learn about the Holocaust because it's an example of unchecked power, bias, prejudice, and racism and hatred. And so using the pyramid of hate from this Holocaust Center for Humanity is a good place to start with that, because everyone thinks that was a long time ago, but it's not a long time ago. We are continually having people who are moving up in the pyramid, and they are subject to that prejudice, bias, racism, and oppression, or they are the doers of the oppression and the racism.
I've been bullied before, which made me feel lonely.
I was bullied for being Asian, and almost our whole group was really shunned. No one ever really talked to us. It was just really lonely and awful.
I'm biracial, so I've dealt with people saying racist things or things that probably shouldn't be said.
Just the increased
time we all, especially students, are spending isolated from one another, it's really crucial to sort of focus on this empathy and on the ways in which distance from one another and a tendency to not see one another's humanity can be really dangerous really quickly.
During a time where it's very easy to dehumanize each other and just think, oh, well, this is just a black box on the other side of that, or that's just a screen name, let me say something to them. But I think when we learn through the Holocaust Center how to humanize each other, it can give us that historical empathy that we need to relate back to people who were dealing with systemic oppression and white supremacy back in the day.
When I teach the unit to my students, at the very end, we asked, so how does this impact us today? I had many students who wanted to become allies and agents for change and positive change. So there was a lot of talk and generative conversation in class about how can we make people feel safer and how can we make people feel included.
After learning about the Holocaust, I think students are more thoughtful in how they ask questions, phrase them, and understanding perspectives.
One of the main lessons from the Holocaust is that we have to treat everybody with the respect and kindness that they deserve. And so I think that's really important to hear, especially meeting new people and kind of rejoining the world after the pandemic, that we should treat everyone with kindness and compassion. And we just need to make sure that nothing like the Holocaust happens again. And we can do that by treating people with respect.
By studying the tragic events of the Holocaust and reading books like Elie Wiesel's Night, students learn how anti-Semitism escalated into genocide. It challenges them to look at their world and to take responsibility today.
I notice that as they're struggling to understand the real human tragedy of the Holocaust, they relate to it, to what they know, bullying and discrimination. They learn that the pyramid of hate is built on these actions. And this is where we can begin our work to make the world a better place.
Bob and I are now thrilled to present our second Voices for Humanity Award to Charlotte Wollheim, a Holocaust survivor who works tirelessly to make the world a better place. When Charlotte was a child, she was confined to the Esslingen Jewish orphanage while her family tried to find a way out of Nazi Germany. Charlotte's family made it to the United States, but not before her family was threatened. Years later, wanting to tell the story of the Holocaust, Charlotte and her fellow survivor, Władka Mead, organized teacher trips to Poland, helping hundreds of educators enhance their Holocaust lessons. In 2017, Charlotte joined the Holocaust Center's Speakers Bureau. And during this pandemic, Charlotte did not let up on her mission of education. She continues to speak virtually to classrooms, spreading her message of hope and optimism. In addition, Charlotte continues to read weekly stories to elementary school children, now, of course, by Zoom.
I did speak at the Holocaust Center, and then, of course, with the pandemic, it didn't come to an end, but it was certainly radically changed.
Our star of the day is Charlotte Wollheim. During the pandemic, I know that learning has been different, and I'm incredibly grateful to our Speakers Bureau members like Charlotte who have been moving along with us into this new landscape. I will turn it over to her to start sharing her story.
On November 11th, 1928, a baby was born and named Lottie. My maiden name is Levy. A group of people broke into the house, went into the kitchen, and proceeded to take every last dish and smash it to the floor. We were terrified. My mother told my sister and me to get dressed and climb out the window and hide in the garden. My father went out to report what he believed was the single incident of vandalism at the police precinct, and he didn't come back. My mother took the proof that we were leaving Germany to the police headquarters, and fortunately, my father was released. We left Germany shortly thereafter and took a train to southern France. Inasmuch as we had already lost our citizenship, I did not feel very German. And we certainly were rooting for the Americans to win the war. I dealt with great sorrow that neither my grandmother nor my grandfather survived. It's really hard for me to fully express my admiration and respect for the Holocaust Center here in Seattle. I think it's imperative that we teach the responsibility of what it means to be a citizen, because it's a portion of history that I fear could easily be repeated. And the only hope is education. And that's why I do this. I'm the eternal optimist. I think it's important for children to learn about what man is capable of as far as evil, but also what man is capable of as far as being noble. And I have a lot of faith in the young people of today. I'm hopeful that they will help improve our world.
We wanted to be COVID safe, so please join me as we watch a video of Charlotte accepting the Voices for Humanity Award.
Thank you very much for this honor. Thank you to all the staff of the Holocaust Center. I'm honored by it, and now I am pleased to pass the program on to a student who is studying the history of the Holocaust and is using that knowledge to make the world a better place.
Holocaust education is important to me personally because the lessons of the Holocaust are so applicable to us today, to us personally as people, and also to current events, right? There are genocides that are happening right now in our lifetimes. And as humans, we tend to get sucked into our own worlds. The Student Leadership Board with the Holocaust Center for Humanity is a group of students, now with COVID, from across the state, which is awesome, who come together bi-weekly to discuss, current events and how they relate to the Holocaust. And what really inspired me to join is I moved back to Seattle, the Seattle area, from living abroad in Costa Rica for a year. And in Costa Rica, I faced a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of hate there. And coming back, I really needed a space to feel like I was in good company of passionate people who were understanding and caring about the same things that I care about, which are justice and creating a positive impact within our own community. Now I'm very much involved in other aspects of the Never Again movement and Holocaust education. And within my own community even, I've done programs for my school, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the Holocaust Education Committee at my school, and that was all really a result of me being on the Student Leadership Board and finding empowerment within this group of people and within our leaders. Holocaust education for me is the vehicle to drive social change because it encompasses so many other aspects of social justice into this one centralized piece of education.
Thank you all once again for joining us today. I'm Lynn Smith, the president of the Holocaust Center for Humanity's Board of Directors. I'm here live at our center in downtown Seattle. As a second-generation Jewish American whose grandparents and great-grandparents fled the Holocaust, I'm here because it's my responsibility to create a more tolerant and inclusive world for the next generation. Joining me is Devin Benaroya, who you just met.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here at the center today. As a member of the next generation, I'm here to ask an important question. What are you going to do to stop anti-Semitism, racism, and hate in all its forms?
Devin's question cuts straight to the heart of the matter. The more we live in this world, the easier it is to become jaded about what any one of us can do to fix what's broken. This is nothing new. In fact, the forces of intolerance are counting on everyday people like us to stay silent, to take the path of least resistance, to do nothing.
That's nothing new either. During the Holocaust, anti-Semites counted on non-Jewish people to mind their own business, to save their own skins, to look the other way. And this pattern has been repeated in every genocide that followed the Holocaust, from Cambodia to Rwanda to Myanmar.
Moments of international and personal inaction accumulate and can lead to violence. But moments of action can add up just as quickly. Your actions, our actions. Your one gift right now could help prevent a hate crime in our community, or stop a young person from looking to toxic hate groups to make sense of their world. And when we give collectively to Holocaust education, that's when our actions really move the needle.
That's because educating young people like me is our best chance to bring about change, to end hate and intolerance. Education empowers, and it's my generation that will have to make Never Is Now a reality. Giving to the Holocaust Center for Humanity today is not just an investment in a museum or a curriculum. It's an investment in people who are next in line to fight hate, my generation. We are the next voices for humanity. The center is ready to teach us, and we're eager to learn. With your help, we'll be ready to lead. We just need a moment of action from you.
Before we ask you once more to pull out your virtual checkbook, let's take a look at how far the actions of our donors and supporters have taken us today. May we see the fundraising thermometer, please? Wow, we are so close to our financial goal of $950,000. If you've made your gift, thank you so much, and there is still time to make another. And if you haven't given yet, now is the time. The last piece of the puzzle is you. What are you, what are we going to do to support students like Devin, to support education in our fight against anti-Semitism, racism, and hate? Thank you. We'll be back shortly to announce our final fundraising total. While we wait, we'd like to give you a sneak peek of our new resource still in development, a virtual self-guided tour of our museum.
Myself, my mother, my brother, and the Jewish teacher found space with the parents of Julia Simchuk, who in February risked her life. In October, her parents risked their lives to take our family in.
Hello again, everybody, and thank you so much for coming on this journey with us today.
We're here to create a future where the words, "never is now," are true. You, our donors, are giving the gift of education. I'm being told just now, you helped us meet our fundraising goal, and not only met it, but surpassed it. We are at $972,829, thanks to you. Oh, and
Wait, there might be $979,473.
And it'll continue to go, so keep giving even after we go off the air.
So we've surpassed our goal, and it took each and every one of you to help us get here. We're celebrating here at the center and hope that you'll take pride in in what we have accomplished together today. There were no bystanders today.
Thank you so much for another successful virtual Voices of Humanity event. We hope to see you in person at next year's event to celebrate the progress your support has made possible. Thank you again.